The morning mist clung to the massive trees of Verdania 7 like ancient secrets refusing to be revealed. Rel adjusted her scanner for the third time, watching the readings dance across the small screen as her transport descended through layers of green canopy that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. This forest moon held mysteries that made even experienced assessors nervous, with its towering trees that could house entire cities and wildlife that had evolved in 3 dimensions, rather than the typical 2. The Galactic Survival Assessment Division had protocols for everything. After 2 centuries of evaluating colony readiness across 47 different worlds, they had seen every possible shelter design, every creative survival technique, and every failure mode that sentient beings could devise. Rel had personally conducted over 300 assessments during her career, watching species attempt to prove their worthiness for frontier colonization through primitive survival tests. The human colony on Verdania 7 had submitted their request 6 months ago. Standard paperwork, standard fees, standard expectations. Their settlement leader had been polite but unremarkable during their preliminary communications. Just another group of mammals trying to prove they could handle life beyond their comfortable planetary surfaces when their technology inevitably failed them. Lieutenant Voss checked his equipment one final time as their shuttle touched down in the designated testing zone. The clearing had been chosen specifically for its challenges: uneven ground, limited natural shelter, exposure to the moon's frequent weather changes, and proximity to several species of local predators that would test any survivor's resolve. Most assessment teams built basic lean-tos and considered themselves successful if they managed to keep dry for 3 days. David Fletcher emerged from the tree line with the casual confidence of someone completely at home in this environment. His clothing showed the practical wear of genuine frontier life rather than the pristine gear of colonists trying to impress assessors. Behind him walked a diverse group of humans, each carrying simple tools and moving with the easy coordination of people who had worked together for years. "Captain Rel," David said with a slight nod. "We appreciate the assessment division making time for our evaluation. We know how busy you must be with all the colonies requesting certification these days." Rel activated her recording device and pulled up the standard briefing on her tablet. The speech had become automatic after hundreds of repetitions, but she tried to keep her tone professional rather than bored. "The primitive survival assessment simulates complete technological failure in a hostile environment. Your colony has 72 hours to construct adequate shelter for 50 individuals using only materials available in the immediate area and basic hand tools. No power sources, no fabricated materials, no off-world technology of any kind." She gestured toward the forest around them. Verdania 7 presents unique challenges with its vertical ecosystem, unpredictable weather patterns, and native fauna that considers most off-worlders potential prey. The assessment begins at sunrise tomorrow. Do you have any questions about the parameters? David looked around at his team with what might have been amusement. "Just to clarify, when you say adequate shelter, what specific requirements are we trying to meet?" Rel consulted her tablet. "Protection from weather defensive, positioning against predators, sanitary facilities, food storage, and sleeping space for 50 individuals. Standard survival metrics used across all evaluated worlds. And we have full access to the forest resources within a 5-kilometer radius?" "Correct. Though I should warn you that previous assessment teams have found the local materials challenging to work with. The wood is extremely dense, the vines are often toxic, and the natural clearings tend to flood during rain cycles." Amy Chen stepped forward from the group. Her hands showed the calluses of someone who worked with tools regularly, and she moved with the easy balance of someone comfortable at heights. "We've been living on this moon for 8 months now, Captain. We've had some time to figure out what works and what doesn't." Something in her tone made Rel look more carefully at the human team. They didn't have the nervous energy she expected from colonists about to face a major assessment. Instead, they seemed almost eager to begin, like students about to demonstrate. a favorite project rather than survivors preparing for a difficult test. Luis Rodriguez was examining one of the massive trees that bordered their testing zone. These old giants have root systems that extend for hundreds of meters underground, he mentioned casually. The interconnection creates structural possibilities that don't exist on most worlds. Structural possibilities? Voss asked, making notes on his own tablet. Oh, you'll see, Amy said with a grin that seemed almost mischievous. We've learned a few things about working with the local environment. As the afternoon progressed, Rel found herself increasingly puzzled by the human team's behavior. Instead of frantically gathering materials or arguing about shelter designs like most assessment groups, they spent their time walking through the forest in small groups, touching trees, testing soil, and having quiet conversations that seemed more like planning sessions than survival debates. Robert Kim knelt beside a stream that wound between the massive tree trunks, not to collect water but to examine the flow patterns and test the current strength with a stick. The water table is about 3 meters down here, he reported to David. Same as the area we scouted last month. Pressure differentials should work exactly like we calculated. Rel had no idea what pressure differentials had to do with primitive shelter construction, but she made a note to pay attention during the actual building phase. Sometimes species surprised her with innovative techniques that went beyond standard survival approaches. As evening approached, the human team gathered in a loose circle for what appeared to be a final planning session. Their conversation was too quiet for Rel's equipment to record clearly, but she caught fragments about sequence timing and growth patterns and wind load calculations that suggested far more preparation than most assessment teams managed. The sun disappeared behind the canopy with the sudden darkness that characterized heavily forested worlds. Within minutes, the forest came alive with sounds that reminded any visitor why Verdania 7 was considered a challenging assessment location. Somewhere in the distance, something large crashed through the underbrush, while overhead the night hunters began their haunting calls. David Fletcher approached Rel's observation post as his team settled in for the night. Captain, we'll begin. Construction at first light. I want to thank you again for this opportunity. We've been looking forward to showing what we've learned about living in harmony with this forest. Living in harmony? Rel raised an eyebrow. This is a survival assessment, not a philosophical exercise. David smiled in the darkness. On Verdania 7, Captain, those might be the same thing. As Rel settled into her monitoring station for the night, she wondered what exactly the humans had planned for tomorrow. Dawn broke across Verdania 7 with the soft golden light that filtered through hundreds of meters of living canopy, creating patterns on the forest floor that shifted and danced like water. Rel emerged from her observation shelter expecting to find the human assessment team beginning the typical frantic gathering of materials that marked the start of most survival tests. Instead, she discovered they had been working for hours already. The scene that greeted her defied immediate comprehension. While she had been sleeping, the humans had somehow transported massive logs to positions high above the ground, suspended them between trees with rope systems that looked deceptively simple but obviously required sophisticated understanding of physics and engineering. Amy Chen stood 30 meters above the forest floor, casually walking across a beam that should have required industrial lifting equipment to position. Voss, Rel called to her assistant, who was already pointing his scanner at the impossible construction site. Please tell me your equipment is malfunctioning. Lieutenant Voss shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving his display screen. All readings are normal, Captain. The humans have somehow lifted and positioned structural timbers weighing several tons each, using nothing but rope and wooden pulleys. Rel grabbed her binoculars and climbed onto her observation platform for a better view. The construction site sprawled across an area the size of several city blocks, but instead of being limited to ground level like every other assessment shelter she had ever seen, the humans were building upward into the forest canopy itself. Teams. of humans worked at different levels, some on the ground preparing materials, others high in the trees securing anchor points, and still others operating pulley systems that lifted supplies with mechanical efficiency that seemed impossible given their primitive tools. The coordination required careful timing, but every person seemed to know exactly what their role was and when to perform it. Luis Rodriguez operated what appeared to be a simple wooden crane, but as Rel watched, she realized the device incorporated principles of leverage and counterbalance that amplified human strength far beyond what should have been possible. A single person could lift loads that would challenge mechanical equipment, and multiple operators working together moved structural elements that belonged in industrial construction rather than survival scenarios. "How are they achieving that lifting capacity?" Rel muttered, adjusting her binoculars to focus on the pulley arrangements. The ropes ran through multiple wooden wheels in patterns that seemed to multiply force through pure mechanical advantage, but the mathematics required to calculate such systems belonged in engineering schools, not primitive survival situations. Amy Chen noticed Rel's observation team and waved casually from her position 40 meters above the ground. "Captain, would you like to see how we're anchoring the support systems?" Before Rel could respond, Amy moved along a rope bridge that connected two massive trees, demonstrating the flexibility and strength of construction that used living trees as structural elements rather than trying to replace them with artificial materials. The bridge swayed with her movement but remained perfectly stable, distributing her weight across multiple anchor points in a way that worked with the natural flexibility of the forest rather than fighting it. Robert Kim approached from ground level, carrying samples of what looked like ordinary forest materials, but moved with the confidence of an engineer presenting finished products. "We've been experimenting with natural adhesives made from tree sap and mineral deposits," he explained. "When properly processed, they create bonds stronger than most synthetic materials while remaining completely biodegradable." Rel examined the samples he offered, finding joints that appeared seamless and felt solid as metal. "These are primitive materials? Everything we use comes from this forest," Robert confirmed. "The trees here have evolved chemical properties that don't exist on most worlds. We've learned to work with their natural characteristics instead of trying to impose our own solutions." Above them, construction continued with a rhythm that suggested months of practice rather than the improvisation typical of assessment tests. Teams passed materials up through the canopy using rope systems that operated like organic conveyor belts, while other workers shaped and positioned elements with tools that looked simple but functioned with surprising precision. David Fletcher emerged from behind one of the massive trees, his clothes showing the practical wear of someone who had been working with heavy materials. "We started before dawn because the morning air currents are more predictable," he explained to Rel's questioning look. "When you're working at height, weather becomes a critical factor in construction timing." "You speak like someone with extensive experience in aerial construction," Rel observed. David smiled. "Every human child learns to build tree houses, Captain. We just never stopped improving our techniques." As the day progressed, the scope of the human construction project became increasingly clear. This was not a simple shelter designed to meet minimum assessment requirements. The humans were building what appeared to be a permanent settlement that used the forest itself as foundation and framework, creating living architecture that grew from the existing ecosystem rather than replacing it. By midday, platforms connected multiple trees at various heights, creating a three-dimensional community that took advantage of the forest's natural structure. Rope bridges allowed movement between different areas, while pulley systems provided vertical transportation for people and supplies. The entire construction moved gently with the wind, flexing rather than resisting the natural forces that would have destroyed rigid structures. Most impressive were the joints where human construction met living trees. Instead of cutting or damaging the forest, the humans had found ways to attach their structures that actually strengthened the natural systems, creating symbiotic relationships between artificial and organic elements that benefited both. This is beyond anything in our assessment protocols, Voss reported quietly. They're not just surviving in this environment, they're becoming part of it. Rel watched as Amy Chen and her team installed what appeared to be a water distribution system that used gravity and natural pressure to move fresh water throughout their aerial community. The engineering required understanding of fluid dynamics, but the materials were nothing more than hollowed branches and carefully woven plant fibers. As afternoon faded toward evening, the human construction project had transformed from impossible to simply extraordinary. What had begun as a survival assessment was becoming a demonstration of architectural techniques that challenged everything Rel thought she knew about primitive construction capabilities. Standing on her observation platform, looking up at the multi-level community taking shape in the canopy above, Rel realized she would need to completely rewrite her assessment report. The humans had not just met their survival requirements, they had redefined what survival meant in a forest environment. The second morning brought revelations that forced Rel to question everything she thought she understood about the relationship between primitive construction and advanced engineering. What she discovered growing from the forest floor challenged not just her assessment protocols, but her understanding of what constituted technology itself. Robert Kim stood beside a section of living wall that had somehow been convinced to grow in geometric patterns overnight. The branches formed precise angles and curves that provided both structural strength and natural beauty, creating surfaces that filtered light and air while maintaining privacy and weather protection. This was not construction in any traditional sense. It was biological architecture that grew according to human design. We call it collaborative botany, Robert explained as Rel approached with her scanner, trying to understand readings that made no sense according to standard biological parameters. The trees here are remarkably responsive to environmental suggestion. With the right encouragement, they'll grow in almost any configuration you can imagine. Rel examined the living walls more closely, finding joints where different species had been encouraged to grow together, creating composite structures that combined the strengths of multiple plant types. Flexible vines provided connections between rigid branch frameworks, while specialized root systems created natural foundations that would adapt to ground conditions over time. "How long does this process take?" she asked, running her hands over surfaces that felt like carved wood but pulsed gently with the rhythm of living systems. "For basic structures, about 6 hours if you know what you're doing," Amy Chen called from above, where she was training vine networks to create what appeared to be natural communication lines between different levels of their aerial community. "For complex shapes, maybe overnight. The trees here want to grow. We just help them understand what directions would be most useful." Voss appeared beside Rel, his expression showing the confusion of someone whose scientific training was being challenged by evidence that didn't fit standard categories. "Captain, the biological readings suggest these modifications are permanent. The trees have actually altered their growth patterns to accommodate human architectural requirements." "More than that," David Fletcher said, approaching from a section of forest where new construction was literally sprouting from the ground as they watched. "We're not changing the trees. We're communicating with them. This forest has intelligence of its own. We've just learned how to have conversations about mutual benefit." Rel followed David to an area where humans worked alongside living trees in what could only be described as cooperative construction. Workers would make gentle adjustments to growing branches, and the trees would respond by strengthening those areas or extending growth in helpful directions. The forest was actively participating in the creation of human shelter. Luis Rodriguez demonstrated the communication system he had developed using naturally resonant plant fibers and crystalline tree sap. The device looked like carved wood decorated with natural crystals, but when activated, it carried messages clearly between different platforms throughout the aerial village with range and clarity that would challenge electronic communication systems. "The trees have natural electrical properties," Luis explained. The root networks create a biological internet that spans the entire forest. We've learned to tap into that system for our own communication needs without disrupting the natural information flow. As the day progressed, Rel discovered that every aspect of human construction integrated with forest systems in ways that strengthened both human and natural communities. Water collection didn't just gather rain, it created distribution networks that improved forest health by carrying nutrients to trees that needed them. Waste processing didn't just dispose of human refuse, it created fertilizer systems that enhanced soil quality throughout the area. The humans had created architecture that lived, breathed, and grew stronger over time, rather than deteriorating like traditional construction. Buildings healed themselves when damaged, adapted to changing weather conditions, and actually improved their environment rather than consuming resources. Amy Chen showed Rel through living quarters that maintained perfect temperature and humidity, through natural climate control systems built into the walls themselves. Specialized plants filtered air and water, while others provided natural lighting during dark periods through gentle bioluminescence that created beautiful and functional illumination throughout the community. "These aren't primitive shelters," Rel said quietly as they stood on a platform that swayed gently with the afternoon breeze, its living supports flexing with wind loads in ways that distributed stress more efficiently than rigid engineering. "This is architecture that surpasses anything in our advanced construction databases." "That depends on how you define advanced," David replied. "We use technology that's been developing for millions of years. We just learned how to work with it instead of trying to replace it." The afternoon brought demonstrations of emergency, systems that challenged every assumption about primitive survival capabilities. Amy whistled a complex series of notes, and sections of the village began to reconfigure themselves. Platforms moved into defensive positions, bridges retracted to prevent unwanted access, and sleeping areas transformed into storm shelters that could protect the entire community from severe weather. "The trees remember the configurations we teach them," Amy explained as the village settled into its protective mode. "In case of emergency, the whole settlement can adapt within minutes to meet whatever threats we're facing." Another whistle pattern caused the village to extend emergency evacuation systems, rope slides, emergency platforms, and rapid descent systems that could move the entire population to ground level safely in under 5 minutes. Every system was organic, sustainable, and completely integrated with the natural environment. Robert Kim showed Rel areas where food production had been integrated into the architectural systems. Fruit trees formed structural elements while producing nutrition, while vegetable gardens grew on platforms that doubled as rain collection surfaces. The community was designed to be completely self-sufficient, while actually improving the health and productivity of the forest around it. As evening approached, the human settlement took on an almost magical quality as natural lighting systems, activated throughout the canopy. Bioluminescent plants provided gentle illumination along pathways and in common areas, while specialized flowers released subtle fragrances that kept insects away and promoted restful sleep. Standing on the main platform as darkness settled over the forest, Rel realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans had not just adapted to life in an alien environment, they had created a new form of civilization that existed in harmony with natural systems while achieving technological capabilities that surpassed many advanced cultures. "How long could this community sustain itself?" she asked David as they watched families settling into their living quarters for the night. David looked around at the village that pulsed gently with the rhythms of the forest itself. "Indefinitely, Captain. In fact, it gets stronger and more capable over time as the biological systems mature and adapt." Rel made notes on her tablet, trying to find words to describe what she was witnessing. Tomorrow would be the final day of the assessment, but she already knew that standard evaluation criteria had become completely inadequate for describing what the humans had accomplished. The third dawn broke over a settlement that defied every category in galactic architectural databases. Rel emerged from her ground-based observation post to discover that the human community had transformed overnight from an impressive construction project into something that could only be described as a living city that breathed with the rhythm of the forest itself. The scope of what the humans had accomplished during their 72-hour assessment period challenged everything Rel thought. She knew about the relationship between primitive materials and advanced civilization. 200 colonists now lived comfortably in a multi-level community that spanned across dozens of massive trees, connected by transportation networks that functioned with organic efficiency while maintaining the gentle beauty of natural growth. Amy. Chen met Rel at the base of what appeared to be an organic elevator system, a platform that rose through the canopy using counterweight systems powered by flowing water and controlled plant growth. The ride to the main community level took them past gardens, workshops, and living spaces that had been seamlessly integrated into the forest structure without disturbing the natural ecosystem. "Welcome to New Canopy," Amy said as they emerged onto the central platform. "We decided that since we were building our permanent home anyway, we might as well make it beautiful." The main community space occupied a natural cathedral formed by several ancient trees whose branches had been encouraged to grow together overhead, creating a vaulted ceiling of living wood that filtered sunlight into patterns of incredible beauty. The floor was a woven platform that flexed slightly with movement, but felt perfectly stable, while the walls were living trees whose hollow trunks provided natural acoustic properties that made conversation comfortable at any volume. Children played on rope courses that served as both entertainment and practical transportation networks, moving through three-dimensional space with the casual confidence of young humans who had never known fear of heights. Their laughter echoed through the canopy, mixing with the sounds of wind and forest life to create a symphony that spoke of successful integration between human and natural communities. Elder community members sat in meditation pods that rocked gently with the natural sway of the trees, while others worked in craft areas where traditional human skills were being adapted to create tools and art using the abundant materials provided by their forest home. Every activity strengthened both human culture and environmental harmony. David Fletcher approached from what appeared to be a meeting with the Community Planning Council. "Captain Rel, we wanted to thank you for giving us the opportunity to demonstrate our integration with Verdania 7. The assessment process helped us refine some techniques we'd been developing." "Refine?" Rel looked around at the impossible city that surrounded them. "David, this exceeds the capabilities of most permanent settlements I've seen on established worlds. You've created urban planning that incorporates biological systems as active infrastructure." Luis Rodriguez emerged from a communications center that resembled a natural grove but functioned as a sophisticated information processing facility. "We've established contact with settlements on 3 other forest worlds," he reported. "The biological communication networks here can reach much farther than we initially calculated." Rel examined the communication equipment more closely, finding devices that looked like carved art but functioned as advanced technology. Crystalline tree sap formed natural semiconductors, while specially shaped wood created acoustic amplifiers that could transmit messages across interplanetary distances using nothing but organic materials and human engineering knowledge. "You're telling me this primitive equipment can communicate across star systems?" "Not primitive, Captain," Luis corrected gently. "Just organic. The trees here contain mineral deposits that create natural transmission capabilities. We've learned to work with those properties instead of trying to replace them with artificial alternatives." Robert Kim led Rel through residential areas where families lived in quarters that adapted to their specific needs through ongoing biological modification. Growing children found their rooms expanding automatically, while elderly residents discovered enhanced accessibility features developing naturally as their mobility requirements changed. "The living architecture learns from its inhabitants," Robert explained as they visited a dwelling that was currently adjusting its layout to accommodate a family expecting their first child. "Over time, Each home becomes perfectly customized for the people who live there, while maintaining structural integrity and community integration. The medical facilities demonstrated the same integration of biological and human systems. Healing gardens provided natural pharmaceuticals specific to human biology, while treatment rooms used acoustic properties of hollow trees to create therapeutic sound environments that promoted recovery. The community's health outcomes exceeded those of many technologically advanced settlements. Food production had been integrated throughout the city structure in ways that created abundance while enhancing forest productivity. Fruit trees formed architectural elements while providing nutrition. Vegetable gardens occupied platforms that collected and distributed rainwater, and protein sources were cultivated using sustainable methods that actually improved soil quality and forest health. "We produce enough food to support 3 times our current population," Amy mentioned as they toured vertical gardens that climbed through multiple levels of the canopy. "And the agricultural systems are actually helping the native species thrive better than they did before we arrived. The waste processing systems exemplified human innovation working with natural processes. Nothing was discarded. Every material was processed through biological systems that converted waste into resources that benefited both human and forest communities. The settlement operated on closed-loop principles that generated no environmental impact while supporting high quality of life." As afternoon approached, Rel found herself participating in community activities rather than simply observing them. The humans had created social systems that were as innovative as their architecture, with decision-making processes that incorporated both human wisdom and environmental considerations in ways that strengthened both community bonds and ecological relationships. The evening gathering took place in the Great Hall as the forest settled into its nighttime rhythms. Natural lighting systems activated throughout the community, creating gentle illumination that guided movement while preserving the natural darkness that forest wildlife needed. The bioluminescent displays were both functional and beautiful, turning the entire settlement into a constellation among the trees. Music filled the air as community members shared songs that incorporated natural forest sounds, creating harmonies that seemed to include the voice of the forest itself. Children presented art projects made from forest materials, while adults discussed plans for expanding the settlement in ways that would benefit both human and natural communities. "We've been thinking about your assessment protocols, Captain," David said as they stood on an observation platform looking out over the lights of their aerial city. "Traditional survival evaluation measures how well species can endure hostile environments using minimal resources." "That's correct," Rel confirmed, though she realized how inadequate those measures seemed when applied to what the humans had accomplished. "But what if survival isn't about enduring hostility?" David asked. "What if it's about finding ways to make any environment your home while making it better for everyone who lives there?" Looking out over the thriving community that pulsed gently with the rhythms of the living forest, Rel realized that the humans had not just passed their survival assessment. They had demonstrated an entirely new approach to civilization that transcended the traditional boundaries between technology and nature. The final morning of the assessment arrived with gentle rain that the forest community welcomed like an old friend. Water collection systems activated automatically throughout the canopy, gathering moisture while distributing it to areas where growing plants needed additional hydration. Rel watched from her observation platform as the entire settlement participated in the weather rather than simply enduring it. Her official evaluation period had ended, but the humans had transformed what should have been a simple survival demonstration into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about civilization, technology, and the relationship between intelligence and environment. Standing in the rain, watching 200 humans living comfortably in a city they had grown from forest materials, Rel realized her report would require entirely new categories of assessment. Amy Chen approached through the gentle rainfall, moving along rope pathways with the casual confidence of someone completely at home in 3-dimensional space. "Captain, we wanted to invite you to stay for our community celebration tonight. We're officially opening New Canopy as our permanent settlement. Permanent? Rel had expected the humans to abandon their aerial construction once the assessment ended and return to their ground-based facilities. You're giving up your original colony? We're expanding it, David Fletcher corrected, joining them on the platform. The ground settlement will remain as our industrial and agricultural center, but most of our population prefers living in the canopy. It turns out humans adapt to vertical communities quite readily when the architecture supports natural movement patterns. As the day progressed, Rel watched families moving their belongings from the ground colony to their new aerial homes. Children adapted to their three-dimensional environment with the resilience typical of young humans, while adults demonstrated remarkable innovation in solving the practical challenges of canopy life. Luis Rodriguez showed Rel communication centers, where humans maintained contact with colonial authorities and other settlements throughout the galaxy. The organic equipment functioned with reliability that equaled or exceeded traditional electronic systems, while requiring no imported materials or external power sources. We've been sharing our techniques with other forest colonies, Luis explained, as messages arrived from settlements on distant worlds. It turns out these principles work on any world with suitable vegetation. We're helping establish a network of communities that live with their environments rather than on them. The medical facilities had evolved during the 3-day assessment period to incorporate healing practices that combined human knowledge with the natural pharmaceutical properties of forest plants. Doctors worked alongside botanists to develop treatments that were specifically adapted to human biology while using entirely local materials. Our health outcomes have improved significantly since we began living in the canopy, reported the chief medical officer, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim. The air quality is better, the stress levels are lower, and we have access to natural medicines that aren't available in traditional settlements. Robert Kim led Rel through workshops where traditional human crafts were being adapted to use forest materials. Furniture grew from living wood shaped according to human ergonomic requirements. Clothing was woven from plant fibers that provided better protection and comfort than manufactured alternatives. Tools were crafted from materials that were both stronger and more sustainable than imported metals. We're not abandoning human culture, Robert explained, as they watched artisans creating beautiful and functional items using techniques that honored both human creativity and natural materials. We're expanding it to include possibilities that only exist when you work with biological systems rather than against them. The educational systems reflected the same integration of human knowledge with environmental wisdom. Children learned mathematics by calculating growth patterns and structural loads. They studied biology by participating in forest ecosystem management. They developed engineering skills by designing and building additions to their living city. Our children are learning to think in 3 dimensions from an early age, Amy observed as they watched youngsters planning improvements to the transportation networks that connected different areas of the settlement. They're developing problem-solving skills that incorporate biological systems as active partners rather than passive resources. As evening approached, the community gathered for the celebration that would officially recognize New Canopy as a permanent human settlement. The ceremony took place throughout multiple levels of the forest city, with music and festivities that included the forest itself as an active participant. Bioluminescent displays created patterns of incredible beauty throughout the canopy, while acoustic systems carried music and voices to every corner of the settlement. The celebration was both deeply human and thoroughly integrated with the natural environment, representing a new form of culture that transcended traditional boundaries between civilization and wilderness. "Captain Rel," David said as they stood together watching the festivities unfold around them, "we want to thank you for this assessment opportunity. It helped us demonstrate to ourselves that we're ready to make this our permanent home." Rel looked around at the thriving community that sparkled with lights and laughter among the ancient trees. "David, I need to ask you something. Was any of this actually improvised during the assessment period?" David smiled. The basic techniques we've been developing for months, but scaling up to support our entire population, refining the integration systems, proving that it could work as a permanent community. That was all accomplished during these 3 days. So you used our assessment as a test of your own capabilities? We used your assessment as motivation to push our limits and discover what we were really capable of accomplishing, Amy corrected. You gave us the deadline and the challenge we, needed to transform our experiments into a functioning city. As Rel prepared her departure the following morning, she found herself reluctant to leave. The human settlement had become something unprecedented in her experience. A community that existed in harmony with its environment while achieving quality of life that exceeded most advanced civilizations. Her official report would require inventing new assessment categories. The humans had not merely survived in a hostile environment. They had transformed it into a home that benefited every living system it touched. They had proven that primitive materials and advanced engineering were not contradictions but complementary approaches to solving complex problems. "Captain," Amy called as Rel's shuttle prepared for departure, "you're welcome to return any time. We're always happy to share what we've learned with visitors who appreciate innovative approaches to community building." As her shuttle lifted, above the forest canopy, Rel looked down at New Canopy glowing softly in the morning light. The settlement swayed gently with the breeze, its organic architecture moving in harmony with the natural rhythms of the forest, while providing safe and comfortable homes for families who had chosen to make their lives among the trees. Her report would reshape assessment protocols throughout the Galactic Survival Division, but more importantly, it would introduce other species to possibilities they had never imagined, ways of living that enhanced rather than consumed their environments, technologies that grew stronger over time rather than wearing out, and communities that included their ecosystems as partners rather than treating them as resources. Flying away from Verdania 7, Rel realized she had witnessed the birth of something entirely new in galactic civilization. The humans had not just passed their assessment, they had demonstrated a future where intelligence and nature worked together to create beauty, sustainability, and prosperity for everyone involved. She made a note to request extended assignment, to monitor the long-term development of New Canopy. She wanted to learn everything she could about building cities that lived and breathed with the worlds that supported them.